She thought she knew everything about her driver. A hard-working, quiet man who had served her family for years, always polite, always invisible. But one evening, curiosity pushed her to follow him after work. What she saw on those dimly lit streets wasn't just shocking, it was heartbreaking. A life shadowed by struggle, by injustice, by a world that refused to see him as more than a stereotype. Could one person's secret act of watching change the way she, and maybe all of us, look at the world? This is the story she wasn't prepared for. It was another routine evening in the city. Mariah, a self-made billionaire, had spent the day in meetings, signing contracts, and making decisions that affected millions. Outside her sleek office, her driver, Darnell, waited patiently, keys in hand, ready to take her home. He had been with her family for years, always punctual, always polite, always invisible in a world that barely noticed him. On the surface, life seemed calm, predictable, controlled. Yet beneath the polished veneer, a quiet tension lingered. An unspoken truth about the streets Darnell walked after dropping her off, a reality she had never dared to imagine. That evening, curiosity would push her beyond the comfort of her luxurious world, into a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew. As Mariah followed Darnell through the dimly lit streets, her heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and unease. He moved with purpose, yet there was a weight in his steps, a quiet tension that seemed to belong to a world she had never truly seen. She kept her distance, careful not to be noticed, but the scenes unfolding were impossible to ignore. At first it seemed ordinary. Darnell walked past small convenience stores, alleyways, and empty lots, greeting neighbors with nods and quiet hellos. Yet even in these mundane moments, Mariah began to sense the invisible boundaries around him. Storekeepers ignored his polite greetings, and the occasional passerby shifted uncomfortably, as if his presence was unwelcome simply because of who he was. Then came the first sharp reminder of danger. A group of men lingered on a street corner, their stares heavy and judgmental. Darnell's posture stiffened, his hands tightening around the strap of his bag. He didn't speak, didn't argue. He moved around them, careful to avoid any attention. Mariah's chest tightened as she realized this was no random encounter. He had to calculate every step and every gesture to avoid being targeted. As the streets grew quieter, the injustice became impossible to ignore. A police car slowly rolled past, its lights casting brief flashes over Darnell's face. Mariah froze as she watched the officer's eyes lock onto him, scanning him not as a man returning home from work, but as someone suspicious. He slowed, shifted his bag, and forced himself to remain calm, even as his pulse must have been racing. The car drove on, but the tension lingered, thick and suffocating. Every step revealed more of the world Darnell navigated daily, a world where simple acts of kindness or patience could be misread as defiance, where invisible rules dictated who belonged and who could be harmed. Mariah watched as he passed a group of teenagers laughing loudly. One of them muttered something just under her hearing, a derogatory word meant to wound, and Darnell kept walking, his face composed, but the pain in his posture unmistakable. The most harrowing moment occurred when he stopped at a street corner to assist an older woman struggling with her groceries. At that instant, a passerby crossed the street quickly, eyeing him with suspicion, muttering accusations that were never spoken aloud, but felt heavier than any words could be. Mariah's heart raced. Each act of kindness, each step, each gesture of normal human decency seemed to put him at risk in ways she could barely comprehend. By the time he finally paused near a small, modest apartment building, Mariah felt her world shifting. She had entered his world quietly, almost invisibly, and yet what she saw shattered the illusion she had lived under all her life. This wasn't just prejudice, it was a systemic, silent threat, a reality lived every single day by a man whose only crime was existing in a world that refused to see him fully. As Darnell disappeared into the building, Mariah remained on the street, shaken, realizing that what she had witnessed was only the surface. The more profound truth, the moments she hadn't seen, the subtle cruelties, the quiet fears, was something she could no longer ignore. And in that instant, she knew that her life, her understanding, and perhaps even her conscience were about to be changed forever. Mariah's eyes widened as she followed Darnell into a narrow alley behind his apartment building. What she saw next stopped her in her tracks. A group of men, some older, some barely out of their teens, cornered him, blocking every exit. Their voices were low, rough, but full of accusation. They didn't need to raise them. The threat was already clear. Darnell froze, calm on the outside, but every muscle in his body was tense, ready to react if needed. One of the men stepped forward, shoving a finger into Darnell's chest as if he were the cause of all the city's ills. A passerby shouted from the street, something biting and cruel, but Darnell didn't flinch. He absorbed it all, the words, the stares, the judgment, the weight of being seen as less than human. Mariah's heart pounded. This wasn't random hostility. It was the culmination of a life spent navigating a world built to question his worth at every step. Suddenly, a car door slammed nearby. Darnell flinched instinctively, eyes scanning, body poised. The man glared, but a moment later, he stepped forward, helping a young child who had wandered too close to the edge of the street. He didn't hesitate, didn't argue, didn't cower. And in that small, quiet act of humanity, Mariah felt the depth of his courage and the cruelty of a world that punished it. Tears filled her eyes. She had imagined struggle before, but she had never witnessed the weight of constant suspicion, of invisible rules that governed his life. Every step, every action carried a risk she couldn't comprehend from the safety of her world. The injustice was tangible, suffocating, impossible to ignore. And then, as Darnell disappeared into the safety of his building, the men lingering in the shadows, she realized the truth. This wasn't just one incident. One moment of cruelty, it was a lifetime. A pattern. A system built to keep him small, unseen and under threat. Mariah knew in that instant that everything she believed about the world, about people, about justice, was about to change. The question lingered in her mind, piercing and undeniable. How many others suffered this quietly, every day, without anyone following, without anyone watching? Mariah finally returned to her world of luxury and comfort, but she was not the same. The streets she had walked safely her entire life suddenly felt foreign, almost alien, compared to the ones Darnell navigated every single day. She realized that his world, the world of invisible threats, silent judgments, and constant vigilance, was not a distant story she had read about. It was real. It was alive, and it had been happening quietly, invisibly, to people like him for generations. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the small acts of courage Darnell displayed. Helping a child, carrying groceries, and walking tall despite the invisible weight pressing down on him. Every moment was a defiance of a system designed to diminish him, a system built on assumptions, prejudice, and fear. For Mariah, it was no longer abstract. It was personal, piercing, and undeniable. She understood, in a way she never had before, that wealth, status, or education could not shield someone from the cruelty of racial injustice. And more importantly, she knew that witnessing it, even secretly, was only the first step. Action, awareness, and change had to follow. As she reflected on what she had seen, a profound question lingered. How many Darnells walk through the world unnoticed? Forced to measure every step, every word, every gesture to survive? How many lives go unseen, unrecognized, unvalued, simply because of the color of their skin? Mariah knew she could no longer turn away, and neither can we. This is more than a story about one man, one driver, one woman. It is a mirror held up to a world that still struggles to see equality as a fundamental right. The question remains, what will you do when you know the truth?